Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello and welcome to you, my friends. This is Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. My name is Andrew Lawton. This is uncut, uncensored, and a whole lot of fun, I hope. And my goodness, I could not wait to record the podcast for this week. I couldn't wait. You'll know why in a second if you don't already from reading the description on TheRebel.media of the show today. But I think this is going to be a first. Well, I know it's a first. And I'm pretty sure it's also going to be a last as well. I believe I am and will die the only Rebel personality to ever interview David Suzuki. Now, I got to give Ezra credit, Ezra Levant, the Rebel commander. He has interviewed David Suzuki, although David Suzuki has never actually agreed to be interviewed. Ezra just shows up with a microphone, and there you go. And to be honest, that's what I had to do as well. Because there was no way that Suzuki was going to agree with an interview. But you know what? Due to a rather unique twist of events, I ended up getting one. We'll talk about that and play that interview for you in just a couple of moments. Also, later on in the show, we'll be chatting with Fred Litwin, blogger of Gay and Right and author of the new book Conservative Confidential, about his book, and which is coming out, and the book itself is documenting Fred's coming out as a conservative. So we'll be chatting about that very shortly. But yes, David Suzuki, I know. I thought about, maybe do that later in the show and then just promote it. But you know what? I couldn't wait either. Because I did not know that I was going to be interviewing David Suzuki on Saturday, but there I was. You see, Suzuki went on last week a tour across a variety of Canadian cities, specifically in southern Ontario, campaigning against Stephen Harper. The tour is under the auspices of Lead Now, which, as you know from reading The Rebel, is a foreign-funded advocacy group. They're trying to leverage strategic voting to oust Stephen Harper. Vote Together is their brainchild. They're trying to get left-wingers to vote for the person who has the greatest chance of defeating conservative incumbents in a variety of ridings. Now, one of these ridings, said to most likely be the closest in the country, or one of the closest in the country, was London North Centre. Now, I'm from London. London, Ontario has in the city proper 4 ridings. One of them is London North Centre. 3 of the 4 ridings are conservative ridings, including this one. The MP, Susan Troupe, was elected in 2011 and is running again. And Lead Now doesn't like this. Lead Now wants people to support one of the alternative candidates in the riding. Now, they've enlisted David Suzuki with their cause. So he was giving a very passionate address, or at least this is what was promised, a passionate address in London, Ontario, and then going knocking door to door to talk about why people shouldn't vote for the Conservatives. After, of course, volunteers have pre-vetted the people that are going to be on the other side of the door, but that's another story altogether. Before the rally, which was held at a small library in London, David Suzuki held a press conference. Or should I say he was going to hold a press conference. Things changed a little bit. Now, London, Ontario is not a small town at all. The city has close to 400,000 people. There are a number of media outlets. There are 2 TV stations. There are several newspapers. There are several radio stations as well, not to mention independent media. And you have surrounding area. You have the nearby towns of Woodstock, of St. Thomas, etc. And all of these people could have come to this press conference organized by Lead Now, hosted by David Suzuki. But not a single person came apart from myself. Now, I don't know if maybe no one likes working Saturdays. I don't know, maybe no one could find parking. I had to park on the street, but there were a couple of other spots available. Or maybe the star for David Suzuki is fading. Maybe even the mainstream media is having a difficult time singing his praises as once was the norm. And I know any of you who used to watch Sun News Network are well aware of the cult of personality and the cult of celebrity around David Suzuki, in a lot of cases promulgated by the mainstream media, by CBC, who's kept him on the payroll for years and years. No one showed up. No one came. No one cared enough except for myself. Now, I didn't know if I'd get the chance to ask a question of Dr. Suzuki. I wanted to ask a couple. I've discussed climate change on this show before. You may have heard even a few weeks ago Mark Stein on the program talking about climate change. So I am not a scientist. I'm not an expert. Neither is he, but we'll get to that in a moment. But I know enough about the narrative itself. My objection, my skepticism to the mainstream narrative of global warming is one based in a lot of ways off of the process as much as the science. The silencing of dissenters, the relentless pursuit of grant money over the actual pursuit of scientific truth. These were among the problems that I had and have had, and still to this day have, about the climate change narrative. I wanted to ask even a couple of questions about David Suzuki's position on this, of him. The one main one that I wanted to get at was how he, who is an ardent supporter of carbon taxing, of carbon pricing in other ways, how he supports this huge negative towards the economy with science that is, in fact, not settled. That was what I wanted to know. It's a political question as much as it's a scientific question. He is, after all, basically a politician who's not campaigning for his own name on the ballot, but he is seeking a political outcome here. So I thought that would be a reasonable question given what he was in London for. Well, when no one shows up, little do I know that I'm actually going to be sitting down for a one-on-one interview. Now, I had asked one of the, I believe, 8 or 9 press secretaries of his foundation a couple of days prior for an interview with him. They never got back to me. Now, this is not an event that's officially hosted by his foundation, or maybe they were too busy, or maybe it was an environmentalist holiday when I emailed, who knows. But no one responded to my request for an interview. So had I known, maybe I would have prepared a bit more, but you don't need to prepare. You just need to talk about truth and fact, and eventually the truth will come out, but so will tempers. I'm going to play for you the interview that I did on Saturday with David Suzuki in London, Ontario. Unplanned. Neither he nor I knew it was going to happen, but I still think it's worth a listen. Sitting down with Dr. David Suzuki here in London for the Lead Now campaign. Dr. Suzuki, it's great to talk to you. Thank you for coming to London and for taking the time.
I'm always delighted to come back home.
So let's talk a little bit about why you're here, because obviously it's the middle of an election campaign. We're seeing enough of the politicians, but you're coming to talk politics, it seems like.
Well, I think we're at a very critical time now, and we've had 10 years of a Harper government, and so we don't have to listen to a word he says. He's got a track record now, and we know exactly the kind of person he is, and from my standpoint, he's leading us down a very, very dangerous path. And so I think the challenge is to do what he did to succeed. He understood that the right wing was constantly being fragmented by a number of different parties, and he coalesced, brought together everyone, and has been a very, very successful politician. And I think the reality then is that he has been able to gain full power with, 40% of the vote. And so the challenge now is, I believe, that we simply cannot afford another Harper regime, and so we have to develop something like Lead Now that offers the opportunity for people to vote in a more strategic way.
When we're talking about the Prime Minister leading us down the wrong path, is this from your background, coming from an economic perspective, from an environmental perspective, column A, column B?
From many different perspectives. The first thing is that my grandparents emigrated to Canada from Japan between 1902 and 1904. My mom and dad were both born and raised in Vancouver. They couldn't vote until 1947. They were Canadian-born citizens who couldn't vote because they were Japanese. So when they got the vote, that was a big deal, and I have always regarded the vote as an absolutely critical privilege that we have in a democracy. And I have voted in every single election. I've never voted for a party that got into power. But I support the system. I think we need proportional representation because in the past, there was still a role that the opposition played. There was respect, even though a party might be in power. They listened to what the opposition played, the role that opposition played, and there were responsibilities. If the opposition on committees demanded that they wanted to see government finances or for programs, they had to do that. The Harper government has been found guilty in the courts of denying the rightful demands of the opposition party. They will not give information that rightfully belongs to the public and to the opposition. So that's a hit on democracy. And then when I heard about robocalls, where people were deliberately being misdirected so they wouldn't vote, I expected my government to rise up in righteous anger and say, we'll get to the bottom of this must. But what do you get? A government that opposed finding out who was doing the robocalling and putting those people in jail. They were undermining the most critical principles of a democracy, which is our right to vote.
In the robocalls case, though, the person who was implicated was said to be acting independent of the Conservative Party, the parties to this, but also he did go to jail. The government did nothing to stop that. So where's the basis of that comment?
Why on earth did the government try to quash it in the courts? The government did not say, yes, we've got to get to the bottom of this. And, I mean, he was working for the Conservatives at that time. And we all know from what we've heard about the Nigel Wright thing that there's all kinds of denial. That, oh, no, we don't know. We didn't know anything about this. How credible is that today? I just don't think there's any credibility. But I think the worst thing to me is that in 1988, I interviewed the newly appointed Conservative Minister of the Environment under Brian Mulroney. His name was Lucien Bouchard. And I said to Lucien, what is the most critical environmental issue facing Canadians? And his answer immediately was global warming. I said, oh, I'm impressed. How important is it? He said it threatens the survival of our species. We have to act now. 1988, and the warnings have been coming stronger and stronger. Canada as a country is probably more vulnerable to climate change than any other nation on earth. We're a northern country. The Inuit have been telling us for decades that the ice is changing, it's getting warmer. We have the longest marine coastline of any country. Sea level rise is going to impact us. And then you think about climate-affected areas like agriculture, forestry, fisheries, tourism, winter sports, all going to be impacted by climate change. And we have a prime minister who denies that it's even an issue, who has spent 5 days recently in the Arctic and never once mentioned climate change. Look at Mr. Obama, who just went up there. He went into Alaska, which is the oil state in the United States, and said, we got to do something about climate change. What kind of leadership is this? Mr. Harper says that doing something about reducing emissions will destroy the economy. First of all, it's a lie. It's an absolute lie. Sweden has imposed a carbon tax since 1991. They charge $133 a ton. BC, which has got this lauded carbon taxes, pays $30 a ton. Sweden has imposed a carbon tax of $133 since 1991. They have now raised it to $167. What happened to their economy? Between 1991 and 2008, carbon emissions dropped by 40%, and the economy grew by 44%. What kind of a leader is it who claims the economy is his thing and denies that a carbon tax, putting a price on carbon, would be effective and not destroy the economy? Sir Nicholas Stern, one of the eminent economists in the world, he was the former lead economist with the World Bank, says that if we don't act to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, it will destroy the global economy. So here is our leader who claims the economy is his forte, that he's doing the best to manage it, but he's doing it by ignoring the greatest threat to human survival.
The exchange that you mentioned with Lucien Bouchard goes back to 1988. A lot of scientists have pointed to the fact that 10 years after that, global warming actually plateaued. So we haven't seen any in the last 17 years.
You're doing the cherry-picking thing. The fact is that temperature has continued to rise, but almost all of that increased temperature has been absorbed by the oceans. The waters are getting warmer. The atmosphere may not have shown a rise. The waters, which are 70% of the planet, have absorbed that heat. There's just no question the warming is going on. And stop cherry-picking that kind of stuff as if somehow it's a scientifically meaningful thing.
Why couldn't you give that?
Scientists are denying that.
Why couldn't you give that answer when you were asked the question in Australia then, a couple of years back?
What question was that?
About why there
this
hasn't been any-
sounds like a Sun News interview, is it?
No, I'm giving you the chance to explain your position. We'll air this unedited. I'm asking you why we haven't seen a demonstrated warming in global warming, because if you're using that to justify...
I was asked in Australia before that report came out. I didn't even know what that report was going to say.
But you knew there hadn't been any measured warming since 1998.
Actually, I didn't.
A lot of other people did.
A lot of other people may have, but there's just no question. You can see the impact, and the oceans have been getting warmer. That's the heat absorber on the planet.
I guess that the big question then is why are you presenting...
What's the point that you're making?
The point that I'm making is that if you're going to propose a massive overhaul to the way the economy is developed in terms of carbon tax, cap and trade, other forms like that, it helps to have some science that is in fact settled. And there are, for all of you cast aside people as skeptics and deniers, there are people that doubt this.
The science is in, and that's the thing that is really atrocious about what has gone on. The fossil fuel industry, right-wing think tanks like the Fraser Institute, and right-wing ideologues like the Koch brothers have been putting massive amounts of money, not millions, hundreds of millions of dollars, into a denial factory that cherry-picks data and says, no, it's either not happening, or if it's getting warmer, it's not humans that are causing it. It's caused by the natural events of some sort.
How do we know that humans are causing it then? Because you know as well as anyone else, there have been massive fluctuations in throughout the entire course of history on things like climate.
All right, you tell me. How are we going to make that decision? Aren't you going to make it on the basis of the best science you have? The scientific community has been on side for decades. So you tell me, how do you make a decision whether it's happening or not?
I'm not a climatologist, but neither are you. Neither are you, though, Dr. Suzuki.
That's right. What I try to do is take the experts, I take them at their word. I base my decisions and my statements on the best science available. How do you, as a journalist, how do you get the information? Do you go to the Fraser Institute? Do you go to the Conservative Party? How do you make up your mind?
Look at all the experts like you.
That's the problem, is I'm not an expert on climate. I'm simply a messenger and telling you what the experts are saying. And I'm saying we have a prime minister who doesn't look to the experts. Indeed, he's firing scientists who might be working in areas that have relevance to climate change. His agenda is very clear. His whole emphasis has been to make Canada a superpower in oil.
The last question I'd ask you, Dr. Suzuki, do you think that Stephen Harper should be thrown in jail for ignoring climate science?
I think that we know that corporate executive who ignores or fails to inform himself about information relevant to his duties can be thrown in jail for being willfully blind. Now, I think that Mr. Harper must be willfully blind. I have no idea whether there's legislation to do that at the federal level, but we do have a way of responding to willful blindness, and that is not to vote for that person.
No, you've got stuff to do in London. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
I must say, I did not know he would get that angry. Because that's what it was. There was anger in his voice, in his eyes. He was at that one point where he said, "Oh God, you're cherry picking." He rolled his eyes, moved back, threw his hand up in the air. All of this, as you just heard on tape. That's fine. He's passionate. I get that. I respect passion. The funny thing is, though, is that the reason I brought up the question that I did as the initial question is because, I'm a believer in second chances. I wanted to give him a mulligan. I can't imagine it was easy for him to stomach the international humiliation that ensued in a lot of ways because of the relentless work by Ezra Levant after Suzuki was unable to answer that question in Australia. What happened was he was posed the question, unscripted and unvetted, not something he's used to, and said, maybe it was just because of a climate denier in Huntsville, Alabama, that there was a 17-year plateau being reported. This was data that was widely available, even, by the way, accepted by the IPCC, this data has been. Now, his answer is one that a lot of other climatologists have since given, which is that the oceans have absorbed it. And this has also been disputed by climatologists. The fact is, in terms of climate science, Suzuki is as much of a layman as I am. But he dares to say, how do I, as a journalist, justify talking about this stuff? And I say, well, the same way as by looking at the experts, the same way he does. And I was actually quite astonished that I was able to extract from him a rare, honest, and humble claim when he said, quote, near the end of the interview, "I'm not an expert on climate. I'm simply a messenger and telling you what the experts are saying," unquote. Maybe that was just because he lost his temper and couldn't answer a simple question without going to ad hominems, without going into politics a few moments earlier. Maybe this is his way of doing damage control. Better claim now, I'm not an expert in climate. Otherwise, people might get the wrong idea. But he does present himself as being an expert in climate. He does present himself as being, and I heard this in his remarks at the rally after the fact, which fortunately for him, people actually did show up to attend, as an elder of Canada, someone there to advise, to guide, to be that messenger of hope and good and glad tidings and good advice for future generations. This is basically what he feels his role in Canada is. Now, I didn't know I was going to be sitting down with him. I just figured I'd show up with a microphone and hope for the best. And you know what? I got the best. What I found interesting, though, was that had this been an event that was run by his own people, I don't think the interview would have ever happened. You see, Lead Now, a group promoting its own agenda, they don't care about protecting Suzuki's image. They don't work for him. He actually works for them in that particular case. And what I found interesting was that the organizer of that, she didn't know who I was. So I don't know, maybe he thought that there's no way a London, Ontario radio reporter is going to ask a tough question. I think that was what tripped up Justin Trudeau when I interviewed him in January. Maybe he thought that he was having a good day. Maybe, just maybe, it was something else entirely. And he thought that, you know what? Everyone loves him. No one's going to challenge him. That seems to be the way he could very reasonably assume media is going to treat him based on the treatment he genuinely receives. But regardless, there were no restrictions on what I could ask him. I don't think I was anything but polite to him, and still he started yelling at me. And, then when someone's shouting at you and yelling at you and getting in your face, you need to respond a little bit. I almost wish there were video of this. Well, there was actually. Lead Now was filming this for a documentary, but who knows if that video will ever see the light of day. But from the moment he entered that room and I tried to shake his hand, and no, you don't shake hands with David Suzuki, he fist bumped me instead. Okay, maybe he's a germaphobe, I don't know. But from the moment we bumped fists, I thought we could have a dialogue, a discussion, not some 80-year-old man yelling at me because I dared to question his science when, even by his own admission several minutes later, it's not his specialty. It's not his forte. I am a believer, like I said a couple of moments ago, in second chances. You know what happened in that Australia interview. If not, you should go and look it up because it was absolutely great. And then he just shouts about cherry-picking this, cherry-picking that. And did you catch that one line? This sounds like a Sun News interview, is it? I have to question, and only semi-jokingly, how does he even know what a Sun News interview sounds like? We all know he wouldn't do one. The only time we ever saw even the semblance of one was when he was literally hiding in his car from Ezra Levant. Opens his door a crack, answers the question, closes it. Opens the door a little bit, answers the question, closes it. You'd have to ask Ezra. I know he asked David Suzuki, as did other people at that station when it was around, and boy, do I miss it a number of times. But he thinks that anyone challenging him is therefore a Sun News interview. If that's the case, challenging elites is something that more media should do, not fewer. But no, he played to his strengths in this interview. When in doubt, go back to politics. Instead of talking about climate science, he talks about, quote, right-wing think tanks, like the Fraser Institute, quote, right-wing ideologues, like the Koch brothers, unquote. The fossil fuels industry. He says this is created by the, quote, denial factory, unquote. No, the factory is actually fueled by scientists, people who are experts in the field and related field. Professors Tim Ball, Christopher Essex come to mind, Dr. Freeman Dyson, Dr. Ian Plimer. Physicists, geologists, earth scientists, mathematicians, climatologists. All people who have devoted their careers to studying climate, unlike Dr. Suzuki, who, by the way, could dissect a fruit fly better than anyone else in the world. Maybe that's why he doesn't shake hands. Got to preserve his fruit fly dissecting gloves. But for climate, he's simply an observer, simply a reader of the field. And hey, there's nothing wrong with that. I do that as well. I consume a wide variety of opinions. But I don't claim to be the expert, which basically has been the basis of his career for the last several years. But he brings it back to discussions about politics, saying what I do is take the experts at their word. I base my decisions and my statements on the best science available. As do I. But you'd think he would know then that the science is, in fact, not settled. The best line of the interview, the best question of the interview, wasn't even asked during the interview. It wasn't even asked by me. The best line of the interview happened right after. I was still sitting alone in the press conference room, and Suzuki was leaving in a huff. He got up, and to his credit, gave me another fist bump, walked out of the room, and just on the other side of the door hadn't closed. I hear him bark at his aide, the Lead Now organizer, and saying, "Did you know about him?" I'm assuming he means me. And I can't be sure, but it sounded like she was starting to apologize. As I say that, I didn't hear because they were trailing off and going down the hallway at the time. But it looked like some damage control might need to be done. Now, I went to the rally afterwards. There may be 150 people there. I don't know. Lots of people came, lots of Green Party supporters, NDP supporters, Liberal supporters, and it was all about how much they hate Harper. And they were getting instructions on how to canvass the neighborhoods, and he spoke there as well. And he spoke actually and told some of the same stories he told to me in my interview with him. And he spoke about, again, the right-wing ideologues that are ruining the country by cherry-picking data. But by his own admission, that's all he's doing, is cherry-picking himself the stuff that suits his agenda. And somehow we're the monsters. We've got to take a quick break here. When we come back in just a couple of moments, more Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. But I'm curious what you thought about the interview. Any surprises there apart from the fact that, it happened? Send me an email. Andrew@andrewlawton.ca is my personal email address. I look forward to hearing from you. We'll be right back on The Rebel. Stay tuned, Canada.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
Hey, and welcome back to Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. All right. This story, I'm probably going to outrage people on both sides of the spectrum here, but bear with me because I have been following this week when it erupted the case of Ahmed Mohammed. I believe that's an Irish name, if I'm not mistaken. Ahmed Mohammed, who has been suspended, or not suspended, arrested, although charges dropped, for building a clock. Now, I know that you know of this case by now. The guy is in 9th grade, 14 years old, and has now been the recipient of much support from people like Mark Zuckerberg and people like Barack Obama, and so on and so forth. The case revolves around him showing up to school very proud of a clock that he built, and it looks like a bomb from a movie does. It doesn't look like a real bomb. It looks like the kind you'd see in a movie, although I suppose people might think that's what they actually look like. He showed it to his teacher, quite proud of it. Apparently, he loves tinkering. He loves technology. He loves electronics. Clearly, he's very brilliant, because I don't even think I could put together a Kinder Egg when I was in grade 9, let alone a clock from scratch. But the teacher to whom he showed it said it looked like it was a threat. She got the wrong impression. He said he's, quote, very sad about that, and has said that he's going to be transferring schools. But ultimately, this has now turned into a case of racial profiling and assuming the worst in someone just because he was a Muslim. And I'm not sure that's the actual story here. To be clear, I think it is ridiculous what happened. Had he brought it on a plane, maybe I would be thinking about it a bit differently. He brought it to school. He was never a threat, never made a threat as I understand it, and never said it was anything but a clock. But no, he was handcuffed. He was fingerprinted. And the police is trying to say that this is just a challenge that needs to be overcome. He said, we want to learn and we want to move forward, turn this into a positive. He's denying, the chief of police is, that this has anything to do with race or religion. Barack Obama's viral tweet to him said, quote, "Cool clock, Ahmed. Want to bring it to the White House. We should inspire more kids like you to like science. It's what makes America great," unquote. I agree. Ingenuity and innovation are the things that make America great. When I spoke a few weeks ago on this very podcast with Michelle Malkin, that was the crux of her book. Talking about going back to the age of invention and ingenuity in America. We should not at all be stymieing that. But when a teacher in Texas says she thinks something looks like a bomb, in an age of school shootings and very real bomb threats at schools, I don't think this is a problem with the way we view Muslims. I don't think this is a problem with the way we view the religion of Islam. I think this is the problem about a PC overreactionism that has taken hold of the education system. This has nothing to do with him having the last name Muhammad and everything to do with him being a student of a public school in the West in 2015. And the reason I can justify this and why I was so incensed by the constant allegations that this was indicative of a rampant systemic bigotry was because I have literally been amassing for years a file on cases like this. I have been saving all of these examples of overreactions by school systems for, I don't know, maybe a moment like this where I need to dig them out. But the list of these nonsensical incidents is absolutely endless. For example, in 2013, a bright red cowboy-style cap gun got a kindergartner suspended for 10 days and questioned for 2 hours by police, during which he even wet his pants. At 5 years old, that was in Calvert County in the U.S. Another 5-year-old, a kindergarten student, was suspended in Pennsylvania for the threat that his bubble gun, a bubble gun posed. A pink Hello Kitty bubble gun. She said she was going to shoot her classmates and herself with bubbles. And she was suspended. In fact, school district officials actually labeled her, quote, a terrorist threat. I kid you not. And she's also, by the way, a white 5-year-old girl. What else do we have? There was a recent one, maybe it was a year or so ago, where in Maryland, a student was suspended, a 7-year-old, for nibbling a Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun. Oh, yes, Josh Welch was suspended for 2 days after he was accused of using a replica firearm and making, quote, inappropriate gestures with it, unquote. The list goes on and on. Oh, there's one boy that made a fake finger gun, and his name was Jordan Bennett. He was 8 years old from Florida. His mistake may have been the pow pow rather than the actual finger gun gesture that he made. And the list goes on and on. You see, we live in a day and age where we are so terrified of the idea of anything happen, regardless of whether or not it looks like it's going to, that we will go through extraordinary lengths, regardless of the race or religion of the person who poses the non-existent threat, to try to end this. Now, this is absolutely something that I think we all should be able to agree is unconscionable and ridiculous, but I don't think this is an Islam issue. And even if it were, what would be the outcome? Do we honestly want to be supportive of a world in which we give a pass to something that, let's face it, is not out of the realm of possibility? We've seen, even in Texas a couple of months ago, at Pamela Geller's event down there, Muslim terrorists. So they do actually exist. That's not to say that every Muslim is one, not even close. But we're deluding ourselves if we're thinking that it's not a possibility that a Muslim could bring a bomb to a school. Or, for that matter, that it's not a possibility that anyone, Muslim or otherwise, could or would bring a bomb to a school. Now, this teacher sounds like she has something stuck up her you-know-what. Or maybe she was having a bad day. Maybe she pushed it. I don't know why this story went the way it did. But I find it to be really odd here. I've seen so many conservatives that are lining up to defend Ahmed Mohammed and saying, you know, how dare he or how dare the school treat him like this? How dare the police treat him like this because of his religion, because of his race? This is a war against not Muslim students. This is a war against all students. And it is, yes, rooted in a culture of political correctness. It's rooted in a PC doctrine. The same doctrine that tells us of stranger danger, should I say warns us of stranger danger, despite the grossly minimal risk attached to that. The same culture that tells us that everything is, pardon the pun, a ticking time bomb, when a lot of these risks really don't exist in the way that we're told they do. This is the real problem here. This is the real threat. Now, I am not at all for a second saying that racism does not exist. I'm not saying that bigotry against Muslims doesn't exist. I think anyone knows that, yes, that is actually a possibility. But I also don't think that we should ever do anything that comes close to driving away ingenuity, to discouraging invention, discouraging innovation, discouraging things that, frankly, the United States of America and Canada as well need far more of, not less. Now, I know CARE has said it's investigating this, the Council on American Islamic Relations. Unfortunately, that organization's involvement makes me want to not support Muhammad in his belief that he is fighting for his own rights here. I think, ultimately speaking, CARE is going to use him as a pawn in the agenda that they have, that Muslims are a persecuted minority, that the Muslim community is an oppressed group in the United States. I don't think that is the case here. I think we need to be looking at the bigger picture, which is the decline in education and the decline in innovation across the board with public schools in North America. Now, I looked at a picture of the clock. I don't know what a bomb looks like, so I want to make this very clear. I don't know what I'm supposed to be looking for. I don't know if it's a bomb or not. I don't know if someone puts this in front of me, what it is. But what I do know is that you have to judge people based on behavior and judge situations based on the sum of their parts, if you will, not based on one thing put in front of you. I mean, it's the same with all of the gun issues. If you hear someone say, I'm going to shoot you, and you look and see they're holding a pink bubble gun and it's a 5-year-old, I think everyone should be able to say, okay, situationally, this is not a threat. It's the same as if someone puts a an electronic device down in front of you and says nothing to suggest that there's anything violent going on and says, look at the clock I made, and shows you the clock. Again, situationally, you should be able to recognize that there is no threat to you nor to anyone else in this particular case. But we used to look at these cases, and by we, I mean me and a lot of other people, maybe not everyone, but used to look at these cases as examples of something other than what we look at them as now. And that used to be, for me anyway, a farewell to common sense. I mean, that was basically it. It was, you know what, back in my day, because, you know, this is how us curmudgeons, us conservative curmudgeons speak. You know, back in my day, this never would have happened. You look at a situation by the sum of its parts. And I don't know why that couldn't really happen here. But you know what? This speaks to the broader PC agenda, which is that instead of looking at the most sensible explanation for this, that you know what? You have a teacher and a school board and a police force that is acting in a very thoughtless manner. And I don't mean thoughtless in terms of insensitive. I mean generally lacking thought. And this somehow becomes part of a broader racial or ethnic or cultural conspiracy. That you know what? This would only happen to a Muslim. Now, I don't know what the rate of arrest is in Texas, nor anywhere else in the U.S., for Muslims based on non-Muslims, Arabs, non-Arabs, other cultural groups as well. I know typically most minorities in the United States, Black and Hispanic minorities, have a higher arrest rate simply because the crime rate in those groups is higher. So when people have pointed to inflated arrest numbers for people who are minorities in the U.S., it actually aligns with crime rates in general. It's not because of discrimination. It's not because of bias. Now, when you're dealing with something a lot more subjective, like a school principal having a hissy fit and overreacting, I'm not sure if we can look at the proponents of this in Arabs or minority students at a higher rate than in the general student population or in the white student population. I don't have the answer to that. And you know what? If it turns out that this principal is a raging racist and disliked Ahmed Muhammad because he was white, then I will be the very loudest defender of Ahmed in this. But I don't yet see enough to suggest that's the case. It is a paranoid world, overly so. And if someone shows up to a school, a public school, with an electronic device, with all we know now, and I'm not saying I support it, but with all we know now, we can't exactly be shocked that someone has overreacted to it. And I think that would happen irrespective of one's religion, irrespective of one's race, irrespective of one's name. And as much as I want to say good for young Ahmed, and truly good for him for making the clock, there are things that we need to consider that maybe this is something that exists irrespective of his religion. He's now getting a lot more out of this. Not bad for a day's work. He's getting an invitation to meet Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. He's got an invitation to the White House. He's got job offers. He's got people who have written to him and publicly and privately and saying, hey, you know what? We'd love for you to come work for us, come intern for us, etc. And I think he'll be fine. I'm pretty sure he'll land on his feet with this. As he should. He's clearly a bright kid. And I don't have a problem with him, by the way. Even his father, who said, you know what, this might be because of our religion, isn't claiming a victim card in a lot of different ways, although they're being sought out by the professional victim groups. No, my issue is with the people insisting on turning this into a race and religion-based discussion rather than recognizing a fight that I've been involved in for several years now, which is recognizing that we now discourage innovation and we bubble wrap kids to the point of excess. But where was the outrage when all of those non-Muslim boys that I mentioned, and a couple of girls as well, were facing the same fate over having a non-weapon that someone mistook for a weapon at school? No, they were a funny little Huffington Post story, maybe a couple of minutes at the bottom of a newscast, and that's it. No, now we're dealing with a situation that's warranting global outrage. the professional victims strike again. We got to take a quick break here. When we come back, more of Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. Stay tuned.
He's irreverent, intelligent, and indefatigable. You're tuned in to Lawton Online with Andrew Lawton.
Welcome back to Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. Very, very exciting guest on the program today. I know it's tough to follow David Suzuki, but he is an author of a really, really interesting book. Dare I say a fabulous book, and I think I can get away with that because he put it in the title. Fred Litwin's his name. A lot of listeners will be familiar with him as the proprietor of the Free Thinking Film Festival, which in Ottawa screens a number of wonderful movies that aren't likely to make it onto the Oscar circuit simply because they challenge the sacred cows of pretty much everything. But he's also been a blogger at Gay and Right for several years, and now has written a really, really phenomenal book and a phenomenal story he's lived that led to the book called Conservative Confidential: Inside the Fabulous Blue Tent, talking about his life as a gay conservative, but more importantly, his life as a conservative that has been critical of the establishment, whether it's the establishment of the gay community, whether it's been the establishment of those who are apologists for Islam, for Sharia, the apologists of any group. He's left no stone unturned. And I'm very pleased to welcome Fred Litwin to the program. Fred, it's great to talk to you again. I really appreciate your time. What is the catalyst for this book now? Because from what I understand about it, in a lot of ways, it's a summation of what you've been living for several years, working within the political realm.
Yes, I really wanted to write. This is a book for my left-wing friends. I really found myself after 9/11 somewhat adrift. The intifada was going on in Israel. Israel was being bombed and blown up. 9/11 happened, and then you had the war in Iraq. And I felt that people around me were going a bit crazy. There was George Bush derangement syndrome. You couldn't have a decent conversation with people on the left about Islam, about Iraq, about Israel, and I was despondent. I didn't know what to do. I was losing friends, and it led me to go into or become a member of the Conservative Party.
I know a lot of people who have gone through something not identical to that, but something similar in that they can trace back their conversion or at least the beginning of their period of questioning to 9/11. Yes. What is it about that day that has such significance, not only in history when we look at it through that lens, but in people's own political identities?
Well, for me, it was such a monstrous act. How could anybody fly a plane into the World Trade Center and kill thousands? And I had to search for an answer. I didn't know that much about radical Islam. I didn't know much about Afghanistan. I didn't know that much about Al-Qaeda. So I had to learn. I had to sit back and go and learn, and I had to find an answer. And it seemed to me that what the left was offering was all the standard regurgitations from the 1960s. It's America's fault. Israel's at fault. It's imperialism, it's colonialism, and I felt, my God, these are not the answers. This is not sufficient to go forward in this new world after 9/11. So I had to do something. I had to move, and it seemed that conservatives were the only ones that were really open to having real conversations, real discussions, and seemed to be somewhat immune to the political correctness around us.
To a lot of people, the idea of someone who is gay being a Conservative Party supporter is unconscionable. I mean, they people just think that, if you are gay, you can't be a conservative. Same as people have said that about other groups as well, whether it's a religious group or a different group. Did you feel that at the time that, this is, I'm supporting this party, but did you feel out of place at that time?
Well, it was very strange. When I started my blog, Gay and Right, I got three types of email. I got email from conservatives who said, I can be conservative, but I can't be gay. I got emails from gay people who said I can be gay, but I can't be conservative. And then I got an email from a third group, which were gay conservatives were saying, "Oh my God, I found you! Wow." What really upset me was that a lot of gay people were saying, "Well, you can't be conservative because you're gay." Well, I fought my whole life to be who I am. That's my whole battle in gay rights, was to be who I am, and now you're telling me how to think. It's shameful. It's horrible.
One of the things that I find interesting, and I'm by no means the first person to point this out, is that there's often times in the so-called gay establishment, and I'm using a word that you've used yourself, that there is a reticence in supporting Israel. In fact, in a lot of cases, there's a complete rejection of it in groups like Queers Against Israeli Apartheid and whatnot. And the thing that's been pointed out by a lot of people is that, you know what, that there seems to be a lack of understanding that Israel is the one country in the Middle East where it's safe to be gay relative to other countries, and some of which you're dealing with a state death penalty. In other cases, you're dealing with the very least a prevalence of very violent discrimination. Is this something that you touch on in the book as well? This divide.
I go into great detail into Queers Against Israeli Apartheid and how they believed that they could make Israel or apartheid Israel a rallying cry for gay pride. It was shameful. It was horrible. It was a hijacking of a great parade in many ways. And I go through the history. I have some amazing personal stories to tell about it. And it is a stain on the gay establishment that will be there for many, many years.
Now, this book, in a lot of ways, from everything I've heard, is not a fight against the gay establishment. It's really a fight against all forms of establishment, it seems. I mean, you're not really leaving any sacred cow unturned, it seems like.
There's no sacred cows, and in fact, I even go after conservatives. So there many progressives will be very unhappy with my book. Many conservatives will not be happy either. I had to write a book that was very honest about what I found in the conservative movement as well.
So what would you like the takeaway of the book to be? Because I know certainly that a book like this can really be incredible in introducing yourself to people. I mean, sharing your own stories, your own struggles, your own observations. But what is the broader message? Are you looking to convert? Are you looking to explain? Or are you looking to simply share an alternative view of things?
I'm hoping that, first off, that people can see the horrible influence of the postmodern left, and how the postmodern left has infiltrated through our culture to affect even conservatives. The postmodern left has had a horrible effect on our culture and our battle. We're in a very, very big battle right now against Islamism. It's the biggest battle we've fought in decades, and we have to get it right. And I think my book is a clarion call for freedom, liberty, and democracy. It's a call for clarity. And it's a call that basically there's not any one of the three parties that have a monopoly on truth and wisdom.
How much would you say identity politics has become the norm in politics, arguably in all parties in recent years?
Well, I make a very strong case in the book that identity politics has ruined the political discourse in our country and in the West. It's people in the NDP don't even realize that the reason why so many hard-working working Canadians support conservative parties is because they're turned off by identity politics. It's the scourge of our discourse today, and you see it today with this mania about rape culture, the excesses of feminism. I can go on and on. The talk about whiteness. It is an absolute shame and a disgrace in the way our discourse has been cheapened by identity politics.
Well, and just has been done in as you acknowledge, I mean, the gay community and people saying, well, if you're gay, you can't vote conservative. I think we've seen that in other groups. I mean, parties on all sides of the spectrum try to claim the monopoly on support for a certain group. I mean, the Conservatives have turned campaigning into an art form in Canada, and they're obviously very aware of who they're targeting for votes. But I think we're seeing it even in recent years, and I see it more on the left. I think from a campaign perspective, the right is has done it as well, but in terms of the entitlement attitude that, oh, well, if you're this, you must support this party. Oh, if you're black, you must support this group is what you see in the U.S., especially in recent years with the Democrat Party. Is this something that is a relatively new phenomenon in Canada in your eyes?
I don't think it's really that new. When I started my work, I remember one of the blogs out there, Dr. Dog. I don't know if you know Dr. Dog's blog.
Yep.
Well-known left-wing blogger. Couldn't understand how I could be a member of the Conservative Party. He felt that I had a false consciousness, and he also felt that people of color, how could they belong to the Conservative Party? It's not in their interests. He was at a complete loss to understand why people would join a Conservative Party. So this shows a bankruptcy of thinking. There's this feeling that your skin color would tell you how you feel about taxes or fiscal responsibility or a variety of other issues. It's racism. It's racist.
Do you think, because I know that your book invokes that the fabulous blue tent, which is obviously a play on the term that's often been described for the Conservative Party, the big blue tent, especially post-merger with the Alliance and the PC parties. Yeah. In your view, is the Conservative Party in Canada the most diverse party? Does it have the biggest tent, so to speak?
It's a very good question. The Fabulous Blue Tent refers to a party that we started at conservative conferences for gay conservatives and their friends. And we became the biggest and most popular party at conservative conferences.
I recall it was always the one that everyone had the most fun at, too. It was always the loud, boisterous, exciting one, and the one that I saw.
Exactly. And I went to the last NDP conference in Toronto, and I have to tell you, it didn't seem very diverse to me. I think the Conservative Party is very diverse. There's lots of different opinions and lots of different types of people, and there's nothing to be ashamed of. We are as diverse as any other party, if not more.
Do you still see factions, not necessarily within the Conservative Party, but within conservatism in general, that are not comfortable with you as a gay man identifying as conservative, or is that basically an attitude that's gone?
I think it's an attitude that's mostly going away or gone. Of course, there is a pocket here and there, but really the conservative movement has changed dramatically in Canada, in the States. You even see, the Mormon Church reached an agreement with the lesbian and gay community in Utah on non-discrimination. You see even a large percentage of young evangelicals supporting same-sex marriage. I think the conservative movement has had its discussion about gay people, and they have decided to move on. Of course, there will always be a small little contingent who are unhappy about that, but it's really minor and insignificant.
One of the really interesting points I wanted to end with your thoughts on was actually from the excerpt of your book in the Toronto Sun. You wrote, as far as when you had been looking around for answers from the left, you wrote about a 125-page pamphlet that you had picked up that was talking about Chomsky's observations on 9/11, and you write, quote, "I picked up a copy and looked through it. It was all typical Chomsky. Bash Israel, bash American foreign policy, blame the United States for Al-Qaeda, condemn the United States as a terrorist state, all 21st century regurgitations from the 1960s. I sighed and put the book back. I was done with the left," unquote. I wanted to ask you, just before we close the interview here, how integral was that in your eyes, already going through a conversion process, summarizing things you had already, I'm assuming, seen and felt about the left?
That incident happened at Book City on the Danforth in Toronto, which is one of my favorite bookstores. And the reason I even picked up that book, it was featured on the counter. They had many copies in a special display case right on the counter. And I picked it up. I knew I wouldn't like what was in it, but it was horrifying that this was the one book this bookstore was identifying as the book to buy. And it summed it all up, that basically we are lost. We cannot have a decent discussion on these issues, and we're not capable of facing the incredible threat we face from Islamists around the world.
Fred, always a pleasure to talk to you, sir. Best of luck with the book, and thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Real pleasure. Thank you.
That was Fred Litwin, author of Conservative Confidential, Inside the Fabulous Blue Tent. Wonderful, wonderful book, and you can also check out some of Fred's writing on his blog, gayandright.blogspot.com, I think is the best way to get there. And look, I find it to be interesting for all of the flaws of the Conservative Party, and believe it or not, there are several, there are many, some might say, but for all the flaws of the party and the Conservative movement in general, I think it's interesting that you have people like Fred who, to the left, are anomalies. They shouldn't be conservatives. They shouldn't support Stephen Harper, but they do because, you know what, in a lot of ways, I think the bigger issues, the bigger picture issues are things like the threat of radical Islam, things like the economy, things like the war on terror, and things like the ideological war on terror and radicalism. And it's funny that you have people that are prepared to call a spade and say, you know what? I align with this party. I align with this leader. And this is not an ad for Stephen Harper. This is an ad for Fred Litwin's book in a lot of ways, because I think it's something that people should definitely pick up. But when push comes to shove, anyone within a movement, anyone within an organization, and within a political party needs to be prepared to call out the sacred cows if need be. And I'm so thrilled that Fred has done that, and very thrilled he was able to join me today for you to hear. So thank you to Fred Litwin, and thanks to all who tuned in. We have a final wrap-up of the program in just a couple of moments here on TheRebel.media. You're listening to Lawton Online. I'm Andrew Lawton.
It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
Welcome back to Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. You heard the man. It is time for the moment in the show where we scour every corner of the globe from coast to coast, from Niagara Falls to Nantucket Sound, and we find the stories so outrageous there must be a liberal involved. And today we actually go to Roswell, not New Mexico, but Roswell, Georgia, where two suspects in a drugstore burglary were apprehended by police. The two men were robbing a pharmacy at Wender and Roberts around 3:30 a.m. on Wednesday of this week. There were three men involved, actually, and police saw the two men wearing masks and gloves running from the business. One was taken into custody. The other two fled. Now, the problem is that they didn't necessarily know the area, and where they ended up fleeing to was the rear gate of the Roswell Police Department, where they both were apprehended. Yeah, I think it's safe to say that when your getaway is bringing you to the place where the police are going to take you anyway if they catch you, it's safe to say it must be a liberal. There's really no other way. Listen, I want to give a big thanks to all who participated and listened in the show today. And let me know what you think about what you've heard. Andrew at andrewlawton.ca. Lawton Online resumes next week on TheRebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. Thanks so much, Canada. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.